back to advancing with watercolor, and we're continuing our exercises with the figure using musicians and dancers, returning to Elena and doing another version of Elena, focusing more on her gesture and in particular the way she uses her hands when she's playing music. To do this, we need to understand a little bit about the components of the hand and how the hand is basically an extension of the forearm, which is in turn an extension of the shoulder, and even in turn of that an extension of the back. The hands play a major role in communicating visually what the musician is feeling, expressing, doing with the instrument. Each type of instrument, in fact, has its own specific gestures and ways that the artist uses the hands. One way to begin is to simplify the hand in terms of components, thinking of it almost as a glove, and the palm is a major shape, the fingers smaller shapes, and starting to think of the gestures that any musician takes with those smaller components, looking for connecting lines on the knuckle or at the tips of the fingers, looking for angles related to the wrist and related to the instrument as well. So a lot of drawing. We practice hands quite often. In fact, if you look at many sketchbooks of artists, contemporary and in the past, a great deal of time is given to studying the hand because it's such an expressive feature. And we can use that in our painting to communicate all sorts of things. And we're going to explore that over the next couple of videos, how we can use hands to do that. So I'm doing a watercolor, and the watercolor features Elena playing. She's actually playing when we're sketching, and you might think that this is creates sort of an impossibility. How do we capture anything that's moving? Our mind is amazing. We can we can see a pose repeated in the musician, and we can remember a good part of it, and we can bring that to our drawing, or in this case, the painting. Of course, photography helps. We can snap a photo while the musician is playing and see more in detail how the hand is structured and how it relates to the bow and the fingerboard of the cello. But having the animated musician is important because they completely change their posture, their focus. Everything is changing when music is coming from the musician, and we try to catch that in our painting. So I started with underpainting. You can see a couple light tones, pinks, blues, a few yellows. What I'm looking at is just giving some some colors that are lighter tones, going to be the lighter tones of the painting. I like to light the figure very dramatically so that there's a lot of contrast, especially on the instrument, especially on the, in this case, the hands. You'll notice that they remain almost the brightest part of the painting. And I indicate some of the local colors, the warm tones that are in the cello with burnt sienna and yellow ochre. It's repeated in Elena's hair, nice chestnut color. There was a blue quality of light coming from the back area, which I thought made a nice contrast, a nice juxtaposition against all the warm tones. And I echo that blue under some of the dark tones that you can see in the light painting. So I'm working on a very tricky area. It's one reason I'm moving slow. I'm isolating some highlights. Look how I create this forearm. Join it to the fingerboard of the cello and use that very strong dark to create the dramatic light that we see. I'm not doing any shading at this point, but I do have that in the back of my mind to create a roundness in the forearm and in the wrist and in the fingers with a smaller brush in a later wash. Right now I want to set up the sort of the major profile of the side of the cello, Elena's forearm, the back of her head, and the shadow that falls across her knee. I'm doing this with a strong dark, it's a neutral tint with some ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna. Those colors, while they're not visible when the paint's wet, will come out a little more as it dries. And you'll see some of the underpainting, that original underpainting, come through, shine through. And this is it's a great reason to do an underpainting, because we capitalize on the transparent nature of watercolor. And this creates luminosity, it creates a feeling of glowing light and light bouncing within our subject. So look at this painting so far. It's isolated some of the brighter parts of the composition, and we can already feel a dramatic light moving across the subject. In the next section, and it's not a bad strategy when you're doing a watercolor, since we're kind of fighting time a little bit. In other words, the paint is drying and we want to manipulate it in some cases while it's wet. It's not a bad idea to compartmentalize your painting and think of it in terms of manageable sections. If you make that a practice, you'll find that you're able to concentrate on small areas and finish smaller areas to your liking without having to manage a large area. Moving on to the partition, the background area. A lot of blues back there. As I said, I want to use those blues and a feeling of light from behind to accentuate the warm tones that are falling on the cello and falling on top of Elena. Same time, I can use this dark tone to isolate the bowing arm, which is holding the bow and has an unusual shape to it. So this is a difficult one because there's an angle to the arm and to the wrist, and the fingers are gathered. I'm trying to paint it express it as a large shape first and divide it later. I'll be doing the same process on the fingering hand. You see it now, it's almost a joint shape to the fingerboard, and it's hard to perceive what the hand is doing. But in my drawing and in my mind's eye, I've decided to divide the fingers later and express the nuance in the hand after this wash dries. So the midtone in this painting, the midtone is quite dark, and purposely so. We've put up some stage lights. Stage lights means a direct overhead light to really illuminate Elena and give it the feel that you might experience during a concert, of an overhead light bearing down on the subject. Some places the cello, actually we see some glare because it's a varnished instrument, and when it picks up a bright light you can see a little glare. That creates a feeling of animation, which I like and want to include in this painting. And that same light is what's illuminating her hands and her forearms, and giving us a little highlight on the back of her glow, a little bit of a highlight on the scroll at the top of the cello, and the tuning keys, the tuning pegs at the back too. So I'm counting on this play of lights, which are joined for the most part. They're scattered a little bit, but joined for the most part through the center of interest, which is in the upper third on just the right side of center. And you can see now that the painting is starting to get that feel. There's an animated quality to it, largely because I'm blurring certain areas and sharpening other areas, using a bit of dry brush to affect a feeling of strings, also affect a feeling of glare off of the subject. lights behind might be popping a little too much, those blue sections behind, but I know how to handle that. What I'll do is I'll wait for that wet wash to dry, and then just place a little more of that blue-gray on top of them so that they recede, and these lights that are in the foreground on the major part of my subject, they will advance. I keep adjusting. The painting really has the major parts finished, and the major parts are the difficult parts and the parts that carry the light. So at this point I'm adjusting, and I'm wondering how much of Elena's features to put in. I do have a warm tone there. I have her hair, which is moving, and as I see this, as I look at it, I feel like it's conveying the sense of the concentrated musician, and I'm almost tempted to leave it like this. This might be a case where less ends up being more. It certainly will allow me to bring more energy and tension to the hands, which you see now that I've divided the fingers and especially focused on that pinky, which is very extended. It's one of the postures that Elena returns to as she's playing the music, and that extended finger is very, very important to the way the cellist is moving along the fingerboard. Also, the way that she's holding the bow with the forefinger kind of extended and the thumb underneath is very typical. So I want to capture those poses because I think they communicate everything that I want to say through those poses. I'm working into some of the areas that have dried and adding darker shadows with dry brush. I'm basically tightening up the painting, deciding whether I want to leave certain areas or mute certain areas, or add a highlight that I may have lost, and keep making these adjustments until I feel that it's close enough. When I can say those words, close enough, I know it's time to stop, because I could go on and add detail, and I've done that numerous times, and I feel I've lost the painting, or maybe lost a quality that I liked. So I'm trying to really measure how much detail to use and how much to leave to the imagination of the audience. As I mature as an artist, as I do this more and more, I realize how important that is, to leave breathing room for the audience. And what I mean by that is when you look at the painting, if everything is very clear, defined in a way photographic, it doesn't allow one to kind of finish the painting. And by that I mean the audience finishes the painting. They can see the blur of a hand and understand that the hand is animated. They can see a highlight on the hair and understand exactly how the musician is looking down and closing the eyes. Even without seeing the eyes, we get a feeling that Elena is in that sort of trance of playing a passionate piece of music. I leave the lower section of the cello incomplete, almost foggy, intentionally. I could be adding details, but I leave it this way to invite the imagination and let the audience experience a little mystery and allow them to finish the painting. So this is the finished work, and the highlights have been added, the bow has been added, and I think we got a good rendition of a musician engaged in the music and with some passion.